Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon to this very special event. Our screenings of the digitally restored masterpiece Gone with the Wind, and this afternoon's exceptional talk, both part of the BFI Love Nationwide season, which is in partnership with PlusNet. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Helen Taylor to speak about Gone with the Wind. Helen will discuss several aspects of the film, including its dubious racial politics, representation of slavery and the American Civil War, and of course its particular appeal to female audiences. Helen is Emerita Professor of the University of Exeter. She's published widely on American and British literary culture. Her 1989 study of women's fascination with Gone with the Wind, entitled Scarlett's Women, has been updated by her 2015 BFI Film Classic about the film. Both books, I'm pleased to say, are available to purchase here at South Hill Park today, and I'm sure Helen would be delighted to sign them for you. After her presentation, there will be the opportunity to ask Helen questions, so I would just like to welcome Professor Helen Taylor.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Julie, and thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you all for coming. It's quite a marathon, you know, to sit through that film and to listen to me as well, so you have my admiration. I've got the unenviable task of giving a talk to two different groups of people, I believe. One group has just seen. How many of you have just seen the film? Yeah, so half the group, sort of almost half the group, have just seen what is generally regarded as the crowning glory of Hollywood's golden age. You're probably still wiping your eyes. It's known as a four-handkerchief film. And the other are eagerly anticipating seeing the film, some for the fourth or fifth time and some for the first. How many of you are going to see it for the first time? Ooh, there's about 5 of you, yes. Well, you have read the book. Ah, you've read the book. Those of you who haven't seen the film, have you read the book? Yes? One. Okay. Well, forgive me because there will be a few spoilers in the talk, so you can. I'm afraid I couldn't think of a way of talking about this without there being a few spoilers. But I hope that most of you already know at least the bare bones of the story, and the ending is one of the best known in movie history. So forgive me, but there are things I want to tell you about the film, and I hope that they'll enhance your viewing experience. In 2014, last year, Steve McQueen's 12 Years a Slave, which won several Oscars, was hailed as a milestone in black artistic success and truth-telling about slavery. His film was the culmination of a whole series of recent treatments of the subject, from Amistad to Beloved, Django Unchained, and Lincoln. And for many decades, slavery in the Old South and the traumatic American Civil War have been the subject of best-selling novels that have been adapted into film and TV versions. Uncle Tom's Cabin, Birth of a Nation, Roots, North and South, many more. The best known and loved, however, is Gone with the Wind. Even if you've never seen the book or seen the film, you've almost certainly heard of it. It prompts many. Can you all see the film poster? I want us to make sure that everyone can see the film poster. It prompts many a superlative, legendary, classic, golden, greatest film ever, you know, that sort of thing. Lines from the book and the film: tomorrow is another day, don't know nothing about birthing babies, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, are quoted repeatedly in novels, films and TV comedies. We think of Dawn French and Jennifer Saunders. I mean, everybody has spoofed Gone with the Wind. The recent spate of more progressive novels and films about slavery are in many ways responses to a work that, at least in popular imagination, has defined Southern history for 3/4 of a century. Gone with the Wind has enjoyed a very long life. Both oh, wait a minute, I didn't want that to come up. Sorry, not yet. No, that's. I'm going to come to that. Go back to the original poster, but now you've all seen the next one. Never mind. I'll look at you, Julie. Sorry, I'm waving my hands around. I can understand why you. Gone with the Wind has enjoyed a very long life. Both book and film version have iconic status across the globe. a reputation that survived social and political change, critical attack, and a new era of multiculturalism. Margaret Mitchell's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, published in 1936, is one of the bestsellers of all time, with at least 25 million copies, 155 editions, published in most languages and countries. Its immortality was secured by the much-lauded 1939 film version produced by David Selznick, which is one of the longest and most lavish films ever made, with some of the highest box office receipts and number of Academy Awards. Allowing for inflation, it is described as the most successful film ever. I never know what that means, allowing for inflation, but that's what you say, and apparently it is. It won 13 nominations and 8 Academy Awards, including Best Actress for Vivien Leigh and Best Supporting Actress for the first black actor ever, Hattie McDaniel. The first musical version, Scarlett, was produced in Tokyo 38 years ago. As recently as 2008, British director Trevor Nunn staged a musical version. He worthily tried in multicultural London to make of it a progressive post-segregation story. His musical flopped and closed very quickly, within weeks. The Gone with the Wind bandwagon, then, has continued to roll for 76 years with heritage dolls, China figurines, song titles, themed restaurants, tributes and parodies, children and dogs named after its characters. Tourists fly into Atlanta, Georgia, seeking in vain the Tara plantation, and instead find themselves buying Scarlett pop-up books and Rhett Butler fridge magnets at the Mitchell Museum. At the Victoria and Albert Museum Hollywood Costume Exhibition in 2012, the famous green velvet outfit, I'll show you that a bit later on, made from Tara's curtains, attracted more attention than any other. So well known is the film poster that in the 1980s, a spoof of Ronald Reagan carrying Margaret Thatcher upstairs became quite an interesting thought, isn't it? Became a celebrated socialist rallying cry, and you'll see this reproduced a lot. It's a very famous poster. The story of Gone with the Wind focuses on Scarlett O'Hara, who's a spoiled Southern belle who reaps the benefits of the slave-owning Georgia plantation life, and then has to face the terrible challenge of the American Civil War and Reconstruction period, getting her own hands dirty, delivering a baby and digging vegetables, and finally prospering as a businesswoman in Atlanta. All this with 3 husbands, 1 unrequited love, 3 children, only 1 in the film, and one of the greatest on-off love affairs in literature and film, her beloved 3rd husband, Rhett, finally telling her he don't give a damn. For British film audiences, the fact that our own Vivien Leigh and Leslie Howard played the central characters with adulterous yearnings, Scarlett O'Hara and Ashley Wilkes, and that British Olivia de Havilland played long-suffering wife Melanie Hamilton, gives the work, I think, a special place in our affections. Readers and viewers are drawn to this story for many reasons, but there's no doubt that its appeal has been huge for women. Kay Brown, David Selznick's shrewd agent, who'd read the novel in proof, so before it was actually published, she sent her boss a synopsis with the advice in capitals, drop everything and buy it. So it's Kay Brown who saw the potential. And she and David Selznick had a clear vision of this work's appeal for female audiences. There was a huge publicity campaign called The Search for Scarlett, which was initiated by Selznick and excited largely female readers and filmgoers, preparing them for the big treat they had in store after the film's release. I interviewed women in the 1980s for my book, Scarlett's Women, Gone with the Wind and Its Female Fans, which was reprinted last year for the 75th anniversary with a new introduction. Despite much female enthusiasm for the work, I found considerable generational differences. Older women enthusiasts had seen this doorstop of a novel, read this doorstop of a novel, and seen the film, which was incidentally the longest they had ever seen, with an intermission, which felt extraordinary at the time, in the late 1930s and 40s. For them, it was a story of romance, glamour, big frocks in a grey make-do-or-mend era. You can imagine how this must have looked in 1940, when everyone was grey. And it addressed their anxieties over survival and adaptation on the home front, following the devastations and turmoil of the Depression, the rise of fascism and Nazism, and World War II. One correspondent wrote of the impact of the film on viewers in 1941 Coventry, a city that was very heavily bombed. She said, "We also were lulled into a sense of false security by the glamour of men leaving home in smart new uniforms to fight for their beliefs, completely oblivious of the Holocaust about to overtake us and our city. Like the Civil War in America, it was one big picnic, one great party, until it was too late." With the end of the war, Gone with the Wind had new meanings. One woman wrote to me, "On June the 8th, when the war ended, I'd stayed up in the West End to celebrate and shout for an appearance by Winston Churchill. And my friend and I had missed all the transport home. So we had to walk home. And on that long trek to North London, we followed a girl and her fellow who was playing the theme tune Tara on an accordion. I've never forgotten it." My older correspondence then closely identified, I'm wandering up and down so that I can talk at different angles to the audience. This isn't for kind of fancy effect. My older correspondence then closely identified with the wartime horrors, deprivations and dilemmas of Scarlett and her family. They loved saintly, timid Melanie Wilkes, but most of them reluctantly admired the bold, immoral heroine, Scarlett, who flouts conventions to keep her extended family fed and herself satisfied. One woman called her the first heroine I ever knew who was ruthless, scheming and selfish. Many of these women shared the precious, expensive book around the family and saw the film under the threat of air raids. From August 1940, air raids in heavily affected cities, such as London, meant audiences were reluctant to travel very far to a cinema, while in Coventry, the Rex Theatre, boasting 2,500 seats and due to show the film on the 26th of August, was destroyed in an air raid the night before. When it was transferred to another local cinema, it was scheduled earlier than other performances, around midday and then 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so audiences could return home before dark. And my book records women's memories of seeing the film under the threat of air raid and returning home before the final credits in case of bombing, so not realising the film didn't have the anticipated conventional happy ending. But in the immediate aftermath of the war, there was huge excitement. One respondent wrote of an occasion in her childhood in a hamlet on Cornwall's Helford River. One day, she said, 10 of us children were on our way home from school. Turning the corner at the top of a steep hill, we bumped into our mums walking up the hill and laughing. We were all stunned. Where were our mums going? What had happened? I can still feel our silence. It was the biggest occasion of their lives since VE Day. They were all off to walk 1 mile up the road to catch the local bus to Falmouth, 5 miles away, to see Gone with the Wind, and would be coming back in a taxi. They had saved up for several weeks for this event, and dads had come home early from general labouring and gardening jobs to put us children to bed. So that wonderful sense of the kind of excitement of going to see a film, and particularly groups of women, going to see a film. Let's see the next one. Some women of that generation emulated Scarlett's curtain transformation. Sorry, this is another little spoiler, but she gets Mammy to make a dress and hat from Tara's green velvet curtains. And curtain material wasn't rationed, so several women wrote to me and said, I got the idea from Gone with the Wind, so I made dresses out of curtain material. In subsequent decades following the war, the work has retained its hold on romance-loving reader viewers who relish its epic sweep across a broken society in which women had to face daunting transformations within the family, and particularly in relation to gender roles. Women of all generations identify or engage passionately with the central character Scarlett, one of the largest and most celebrated female roles in literature and film. And it's a role that passes a thing you may have heard of, the feminist Bechdel test, which is a test in a film of whether you have two female characters talking for a significant amount of time about anything other than a man. And this does actually happen in Gone with the Wind. It's a very small percentage of films in which this is the case. I received responses from younger women who encountered Gone with the Wind from the 1970s onwards. And they saw Scarlett as a feminist role model, with Melanie dismissed as a milksop. A premature women's liber, one said, while another claimed, in her own way, she affirms women as individuals. One said, you have to admire a woman who can rifle a dead man's pockets, steal her spinster sister's fiancé, and still look down her nose at Belle Watling, the prostitute. However, this generation of women felt uncomfortable about the treatment of black characters and the uncritical representation of slavery. I want to dwell briefly on the issue of slavery because it's relevant to today's viewers of Gone with the Wind. Steve McQueen's 12 Years a Slave, as I said, was hailed as a milestone in telling the truth about slavery. And his film followed a whole series of films that tackled the subject. In 2015, with an African-American US president serving his second term of office, countries trying to make reparation for the slave trade and slavery, global awareness of the tragic consequences of racial divisions, you'd think Gone with the Wind would be an embarrassing anachronism. Earlier this year, following the spate of police shootings of African Americans in the USA, you may remember Ferguson and many other examples, one senator called for the film never to be shown again because of its glorification of the Confederate white South. And every time the film's shown on TV, modern viewers cringe at Mammy, Scarlett's fat, comical surrogate mother who lives for her white family, and Prissy, the comic buffoon who lies about her midwifery experience and gets slapped for her pains. In a novel called Divine Secrets of the Ya-Ya Sisterhood by Rebecca Wells, the young Vivi visits Atlanta for the 1939 film premiere, and she's horrified at the way her black maid is barred from the celebrations and badly treated by privileged white women. This recalls the shocking exclusion of all black actors from that glittering event, and the separate tables occupied by white and black actors during the 1940 Academy Awards ceremony, at which Hattie McDaniel won that first black Oscar for Best Supporting Actress. It is astonishing to think she had to sit at a separate table. 74 years later, happily, in 2014, Lupita Nyong'o, who won hers for 12 Years a Slave, was indisputably star of the whole show and was certainly sitting at mixed race tables. In 2001, African-American novelist Alice Randall published a parody of Gone with the Wind, a novel that, as far as I know, has never been made into a film, called The Wind Done Gone. It's a very unromantic story in which all the black and white characters are related, and they all end up buried together. It's a sort of utopian comic novel. It's rather brilliant. And they tried to, the Margaret Mitchell estate tried to suppress it. They tried to they tried to prosecute it for plagiarism. They lost, I'm glad to say. Some of you will remember the phenomenally successful TV series Roots, which broke all viewing records in the 1970s. Do some of you remember that? Yes, it was quite an event. And that Roots was marketed as the black Gone with the Wind. It was actually because it used so many of the same kinds of devices as Gone with the Wind. In 2014, the film Half of a Yellow Sun, covering 8 years of the 1960s Biafran War, was made into a film starring Thandie Newton. She referred to the film as Gone with the Wind in Nigeria. So all these liberal progressive novels and films about slavery challenge Gone with the Wind. They allude to it. They use elements of it. The focus on family, the land, power relations, the closeness between master and slave. And in the case of a film like Steven Spielberg's The Colour Purple, it quite deliberately emulated the production values of Gone with the Wind, using the same kind of soaring musical score, lavish and gloriously colourful cinematography, sweeping landscapes and so on. You can certainly see, if you see the two films together, you can see the parallels. So I think, I always argue when people say we just shouldn't show it, I say it's important we remember this original film to which these modern versions have responded and against which they've reacted. We have to remember the history of cinema, and we have to remember, you know, where they all came from. I want to turn now to Vivien Leigh. Can we have the next slide? It was no coincidence that you can see Vivien Leigh. I'm sorry she's dimly there, but I wanted you to see her with the three very important men in her life: Clark Gable, David Selznick and Victor Fleming, or is it the other way around? They look very similar there, and not at all. I think that's David Selznick and that's Victor Fleming. David Selznick, the producer, Victor Fleming, the director. It was no coincidence that Selznick cast British actors in the film's three leading roles. A great Anglophile who directed adaptations of films like David Copperfield, A Tale of Two Cities. Selznick had followed closely the British sales of the best-selling novel in relation to his casting of Scarlett. He was very interested in the British market, which was very important at the time. But Vivien Leigh had already long made up her own mind. She desired the part so passionately, she forced herself onto Selznick's attentions very cleverly, and she won the part over the cream of Hollywood stars who all thought it theirs by right. Tallulah Bankhead, Katharine Hepburn, Bette Davis, Joan Crawford, all the Hollywood greats, they thought it had to go to one of them. And they were very fed up that it went to Vivien Leigh. Though the whole industry was very sceptical before the premiere, they melted afterwards. They agreed she had played it to perfection, even complimenting her on having the film's best Southern accent. And if you notice, Clark Gable refused to even try a Southern accent. He said to David Selznick, forget it, I'm just not going to do it. And Ashley Wilkes, Leslie Howard is terrible. I mean, his accent is quite terrible. So, but Vivien Leigh's is spot on and was much praised by the American film industry. What she did, which I think is rather lovely, is that when she was acting in a play in 1937 in London, Vivien Leigh gave each member of the cast a copy of the novel, and she carried it about devotedly. She shared with David Selznick a deep commitment to that novel, which partly explains, I think, her empathy with Scarlett and her profound understanding of the character. She'd learned several chunks of the book by heart before she even landed the part. It also explains some of her conflicts with the very down-to-earth and decidedly unliterary director Victor Fleming, who replaced George Cukor as director. George Cukor was much more sensitive, much more literary. When she was agonising over motivation, as spelled out by author Margaret Mitchell, Fleming snapped at Vivien Leigh, "Just ham it up," he said. And he once told her to stick that script up her royal British ass. So you see, a very charming man. He was a big friend of Clark Gable's. They were there was a sort of male buddyism going on, and Vivien Leigh had to kind of fight that. Much of the appeal, can I see the next slide? Much of the appeal, isn't that lovely? I always wanted to wear that dress, but I don't have that waist. I wouldn't have fitted into it. Much of the appeal of Gone with the Wind derives from Leigh's bravura performance. For most women, Scarlett O'Hara is Vivien Leigh, except for Angela Carter, who described her as anorexic, overdressed, one of the least credible of Hollywood femme fatale, most of whose petulant squeaks are audible only to bats. It's very cruel and quite wrong. Vivien Leigh starred in and got Oscars for both Gone with the Wind and A Streetcar Named Desire, in which she embodied, I'm going to show you a slide of that in a minute, in which she embodies two very different aspects of the Southern Belle. Now, this Southern Belle figure, I'll just say a bit about it. She was created in plantation romance novels of the early 19th century, and she's been the subject of many a popular film and TV treatment since. Just think of recent things like Jezebel in the 30s, The Golden Girls, Steel Magnolias, Driving Miss Daisy. The Belle, who retains a strong hold on Southern culture to this day, is white, beautiful, usually rich. though in modern versions these qualities are reduced or parodied. And she was on a pedestal that proclaimed an idealised, uncorrupted, pure white South that was uncontaminated by blackness. She had to be ladylike, manipulative of others, especially men, and she was discouraged from spontaneous expressions of sexual or emotional desire. But within a white patriarchal South, this came at a price, and the youthful, eligible Southern belle we have there could quickly be transformed into a bitter, ageing, unmarried belle whose beauty and sexual allure are gone, her role in society an embarrassment, and her mental health unstable. Isn't it astonishing to think that's the same actress? So in Vivien Leigh's contrasting parts, played 12 years apart, Scarlett and Blanche Dubois, she was Southern belle first glorified and then demonised. Scarlett, the survivor of the Old South, fighting off defeat and loss, and then Blanche Dubois, the victimised South, depressive, sadomasochistic, post-war New South. Two warring sides of Southern femininity, and unfortunately exactly the way most biographers have read the two sides of Vivien Leigh herself, because she had bipolar disorder. And so people just said, oh, well, she was acting the two parts of her own personality. She was a very much better actress than that. Just to put my glass down. Globally, Vivien Leigh was known through her films, though in Britain she was also a stage actress of considerable success, idolised as a great beauty and married to Laurence Olivier, part of a glamorous celebrity couple. She thought of herself as an actress, not a film star, which is quite interesting at that time. She had that snobbery about the theatre that was characteristic of British actors and audiences until the 1960s. Allied with that was her great interest in languages, literatures, culture. When praised for her authentic speech in Gone with the Wind, are you okay? Would you like some of my water? No. Sure, okay. When she was praised for her authentic speech in Gone with the Wind, she said, I learn lines easily, and I've always had an ear for languages and accents. And that was something she proved repeatedly in her roles as a Georgia Peach in Gone with the Wind, a Mississippian in Streetcar, and a Virginian in Ship of Fools. Slightly different accents, very nuanced accents in all three. The book Gone with the Wind was perfect for a bookish, budding actress. Divided into 5 parts and 2 volumes, it echoed both the Victorian novel with its strong character and narrative development, and also the acts of a tragic drama designed to appeal to her dramaturgical instincts. And the film, I don't know if those of you who've just seen it noticed how very literary and theatrical the film is. There are 11 sequences. There are 2 parts, of course, with an intermission. An intermission, a very sort of theatrical thing. 11 sequences, an entr'acte, and a very literary use of text throughout. Notice how many letters there are, lists of dead soldiers, announcements of deaths and furloughs, summaries of historical events, all this in script, and also a polemical running script at the opening by Ben Hecht, which I have to say Margaret Mitchell would have hated. It's very much a kind of Walter Scott sort of fantasy statement about what the film is going to be about. I just want to show you the slide of that and read it. This is not how Margaret Mitchell had a very much more down-to-earth and kind of down and dirty view of the Old South. There was a land of cavaliers. She never used the word cavalier. Cavaliers and cotton fields called the Old South. Here in this patrician world, the age of chivalry took its last bow. She never used the word chivalry, except ironically. Here was the last ever to be seen of knights and their ladies fair, of master and of slave. Look for it only in books, for it's no more than a dream remembered, a civilization gone with the wind. This is not Margaret Mitchell at all, but it's an example of how text was used repeatedly through the film. The novel and film open in the moonlight and magnolias Old South, and in Scarlett we have the steel magnolia we'll see develop later in the film. She's magnetic, charismatic, very white, very beautiful, even though Margaret Mitchell's first line is Scarlett O'Hara was not beautiful. She's completely self-absorbed. War, 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 she mocks to the twins who are very excited about going to war. And as a spoiled go-getter, she focuses entirely on winning Ashley Wilkes away from his cousin. And I think Vivien Leigh balances the giddiness and frivolity of youth with a determination that augurs well for her later challenges. As the war proceeds and her life experience gets more complicated and profound, she becomes an increasingly isolated woman. And Vivien Leigh conveys the cool realism, the desperation, the gumption of a woman at her absolute limits. She embodies for the audience both the white female southern upper class and also a whole 1930s generation emerging from the hungry years of depression, about to enter a terrible war. I haven't got a slide, unfortunately, of her standing, shaking her fist really at the gods, but that's the dress that she's doing it in, and that's the kind of figure that she becomes. At the end of the first half of the film, which is that what I'm referring to, her family is decimated and those left behind are all dependent on her. And she rises to her full height, having plucked a last radish out of the garden, out of the vegetable garden, and she says, "As God is my witness, I'll never be hungry again." And she's saying, "I'm going to live through this, and when it's over, I'll never be hungry again." And those words were, as I say, very, very resonant for a 30s generation. And I think they're still resonant for all of us who understand what the challenges of history bring. In the second act of the film, Scarlett saves Tara via a dubious marriage and ruthless business practices, and she then faces disgrace, multiple deaths, and the departure of her husband. But Lee's bravura performance binds together the two contrasting halves of the film. First, that nostalgic, white-dominated Old South, a national epic of war and reconstruction. And secondly, the melodramatic and tragic, intimate family story. So there are two very different parts to this film. The first kind of is, as I say, is very much taken up with the war. The second is very much about the family. It's domestic, it's set in houses. At the end, when she comes to understand too late how she feels about everyone, she's left alone with Rhett's words ringing in her ears. "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn," he says. Frankly was added in the film. It was not in, Margaret Mitchell says, "My dear, I don't give a damn." And David Selznick brilliantly added that word frankly. He felt that the rhythm of the sentence was right with frankly. But the word damn, he had to go back and back to the Hayes Office censor because you could not use the word damn. I mean, isn't it extraordinary in 2015 to think that the word damn was so shocking? But it was deeply shocking. No one was allowed to use it in film. And David Selznick wrote these brilliant letters. He was an amazing letter writer to the Hayes Code justifying the use of that word. He spent hours and hours sort of arguing that he should use it, and he was right to use it. At the end of the film, I'm just cutting a few things because I want us to have time, not only for you to have a break, but also for me to answer any questions you have. Margaret Mitchell received thousands of letters after her novel was published, asking whether Scarlett gets Rhett back. And this is a big debate that you find after the film, people wondering whether she does, whether she doesn't. She refused to say, and in her will she forbade sequel publication. The Margaret Mitchell estate, however, got greedy, and from the early 1990s they commissioned writers to produce sequels, and there have been a couple of sequels. The estate was, however, very, very controlling and did not want any reference to the murkier sides of the slave and Reconstruction South. And they wouldn't allow any references to miscegenation, which is sex between the races, mixed race characters, or unorthodox sexualities. And Pat Conroy, the Southern novelist, he was asked to write a sequel by the trustees. And his companion novel would have killed off Scarlett O'Hara, can you believe? But he said he refused to accept any censorship of subject matter. And he said that the estate's refusal to allow any hint of homosexuality or miscegenation meant that his novel would begin with the line, "After they made love, Rhett turned to Ashley Wilkes and said, Ashley, have I ever told you that my grandmother was black?" Perhaps not surprisingly, the novel was never written. There's just one scene in the novel, and I want to show you two slides from that. The first slide, this is a very famous scene in the film that is controversial, and rightly so. It was dubbed by Selznick row and rape, so he sort of thought of it as a rape, though I think rape at that time had different connotations. What they do, Scarlett and Rhett engage in fierce marital warfare that concludes with a night of passion. And audiences have long argued about this dramatic exchange between the two. And I discuss it in both my books in different ways. With domestic violence being so high on our political and cultural agenda, I think this scene of alcohol-fueled marital strife makes us rightly uneasy. As with many of the scenes involving slaves or freed slaves in relation to white masters and mistresses, I think contemporary sensibilities are very uneasy. I mean, we are unhappy about watching this, about power relations and abuses. So I think it's right if this does make you feel uncomfortable. On the other hand, I think this scene is rather brilliant in that it tells us something profound about the power struggle between two partners who are, I think, fatally defensive. I think this couple, there's no future for this couple. I feel they are fatally defensive. They're defensive at all stages and they can never break through that. And I think it tells you a lot about the vulnerability of men. So, let me last come to the love theme of today's screening, because this is a love season that the BFI's put on. We are here by courtesy of the BFI. And love is the theme. So I want to say a little bit about this love story between men and women. Now, there are three in these marriages. You'll all recognise that quote. The central lovers, Scarlett O'Hara and Rhett Butler, meet as Scarlett is throwing herself into the arms of another man, Ashley Wilkes. This explosive love triangle embodies struggles, I think, about different images of the South and loyalties to white family and friends, to slaves and freedmen. And it produces much of the film's sexual tension, emotional suspense, and rich comedy. Don't underestimate the comedy in this film. Those of you who've just seen it, I hope, saw the comedy. The sparkling screenplay is credited to Sidney Howard, who died before the film came out. But it was worked over by the producer David Selznick and at least 16 other writers. Isn't that extraordinary? 16 other writers, including Scott Fitzgerald, very briefly. And it's worthy of the best romantic comedies. The sparring between Scarlett, with her pig-headedness and her lack of self-knowledge, and Rhett, whose challenging humour, his quick-wittedness, gives him every advantage over the utterly humourless Ashley Wilkes. And as every woman knows, humour is one of a man's sexiest qualities. I didn't show you the second slide, did I? This is Scarlett the morning after. Sorry, that was to show you, to remind you of this scene. But we'll go on to the. We'll just leave that on the screen because it's rather a lovely shot of Vivian Leigh. So the screenplay, I think, gives us all this lovely humour. And the trials that they face, the battle of wills, the negotiation of their roles vis-a-vis each other, I think are worthy of many a Hollywood romantic couple and romantic comedy couple, from Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn to Woody Allen and Diane Keaton. At their first meeting, Scarlett declares, "Sir, you are no gentleman." And Rhett retorts, "And you, miss, are no lady." And when Scarlett arrives at the Atlanta jail to try and get money out of Rhett, dressed in her curtains, Rhett understands only too well she's role-playing And he asks in mock chivalric fashion, "Scarlett, can it be possible that you've grown a woman's heart?" And she kind of, you know, there is very little, there is almost no kind of romantic exchange between this great love couple. And yet we think of them as lovers, we think of them as great lovers. In the second half of the film, there's a much mellower tone. The drama moves away from the Civil War into post-war domestic conflict, and it shows a deepening self-knowledge and reflectiveness in the key lovers, and also actually a new level of bitterness between them. The tempestuous, short-lived union between Scarlett and Rhett is followed by a series of tragic misreadings of each other's desires, while we, the audience, are egging them on all the time to put it all right, to no avail. A 1930s Hollywood film would usually produce either a triumphant marriage or a sad female victim, the classic tragic heroine. But as half of you know, and the other half will find out, this isn't so, and we're given a rather original vision of hope and optimism. This sweeping epic stars an endlessly fascinating, feisty protagonist, one of very few epic heroines to survive and thrive through a full range of female experience. Scarlett is a deviant daughter, a would-be adulterer, a flawed wife, a negligent mother, a murderer, a courageous friend, a careless friend, and a courageous defender of hearth and home. She experiences some of the worst possible human tragedies. All this against a backdrop of historical crisis that forces her to react creatively to major life challenges, to learn the importance of continuities of land and home, and respond to the unexpected without becoming a victim. As one woman wrote to me, "I feel very strongly about Gone with the Wind, and it must be because I found out about love and sex and violence and childbirth and war and racism, all those important things through it." In terms of romantic love, then, Gone with the Wind never offers easy answers or trite characterisation. We're coming near to the end of my talk. Scarlett is a pragmatic, masculinist figure who masquerades as an ultra-feminine Southern belle, but displaying little interest in a belle's proper concerns, which are husbands, children, and homemaking. She's forced by catastrophic wartime events and deaths to become the man of the family. The no less than, and I think this is very shocking, there are no less than 10 acts of physical violence that she performs throughout the film. And they suggest a profound frustration, a post-traumatic stress for which the codes of Southern femininity offer no guidelines or solace. Ashley Wilkes, who was most commonly dismissed by female audiences as a wimp, struggles against the constraints of Southern heroic masculinity, increasingly needy and dependent on women, wanting only to be left alone to read poetry and philosophy. Rhett Butler, on the other hand, navigates between the worlds of women and men with great aplomb. He defines himself in feminine as well as masculine terms. He knows how to choose a Parisian bonnet, he knows how to put it on, and how to be an empathetic and a hands-on parent, as well as how to take on those piratical masculine skills of gambling, blockade running, fighting in the war, and being a prostitute's familiar. What brings them together is that Scarlett and Rhett both resist the roles assigned to them as Southern men and women. They enjoy transgressing all the codes of gender, class, sexuality, race. And what the film demonstrates is the many ways that love can surprise you, trip you up, emerge unexpectedly from crisis and tragedy. The final poignant scenes of the film offer a whole panoply of relationships of love for friends, children, partners, community, land, all of which have been put to ultimate test through a cataclysmic historical period. And for female audiences in particular, Scarlett's dawning self-knowledge and her emotional epiphany echo our own experiences of life and love and offer hope for the future. Refusing the role of victim with a pragmatism that has saved her throughout the film, she resolves to think about it tomorrow because tomorrow is another day. And the number of women who wrote to me and said how much they lived with that little that little saying in their lives, including my own mother, actually, who used to tell me how important it was to her. And the yearning for Tara, which we get at the end, is something Scarlett, I think, expresses in universal human terms. Whatever else fails, we must have faith in and nurture our roots, our patch of earth we call home, where we can lick our wounds and regain strength and will to live. That's what Scarlett does. And in our own troubled times, I think that's a comforting and inspiring message indeed. Thank you. So, I don't know if people, I tried not to talk too long because I'm aware that some of you are going to see a film now. The film's much more entertaining.
I know someone definitely has a question because they said to me when they came out of the film, gentleman there.
You mentioned...
You have a question? Oh, you've got my book, how nice.
Yes. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a
Yes.
damn, but the emphasis was different.
I know, mine was, yes, you're quite right. Yes, he says, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, doesn't he?
Which is a very odd way of
It
saying
is, I agree.
Is there any reason?
I think Clark Gable, Clark Gable was king of Hollywood. Clark Gable did what he liked. And there are certain lines and certain elements of this film where Clark Gable got his own way. And I agree with you, I absolutely agree with you. I think the way he says that is strange. But I can forgive him anything, can't you? I mean, I just...
Maybe the emphasis on
No,
the word damn.
I absolutely agree. You may be right that damn he was slightly kind of downplaying damn, because if you say I don't give a damn, you are, yes, that may be right. That's a very good observation. Absolutely, you keep it subdued. Good thinking.
I've heard the quote so often that I find it quite natural to say I couldn't give a damn.
Yes.
You know, the
Yes.
emphasis on give. Is this funny? I've never thought about that.
Yes.
Very interesting. I work with languages, so I'm...
Right. There is I didn't say it in my talk, but there's a moment. The first appearance of Rhett Butler, I'm sorry, I say it in both the books that I've written about Gone with the Wind because I think it's irresistible, is that when Clark Gable first appears in the film, he's at the bottom of some stairs. And almost every time I watched it in the cinema, women sigh. It's such a sexually powerful appearance. I don't know those of you who saw it, who've just seen it. Don't you think his first appearance, he's there and he's looking up the stairs at Scarlett. And she says, well, I won't say what she says because you're about to see it. But what she says, you think, yes, I can see that. Are there any other questions you have?
Did you say
Yes.
that not all her children are in the film?
This is true. Scarlett has 3 children in the novel. She has only 1 in the film. And I think that was... I think the children would have complicated a lot of things, and I think they would have distracted from the focus on Scarlett. Her as a mother earlier in the film. I mean, she has her only child quite late in the film. I think it would have muddied the kind of morality of the film around certain things that she does. She's not much of a mother, you see. Not very maternal. Which would have been very difficult in the 30s. It is still difficult.
I didn't read the book.
She has 3 children.
And
Yeah.
So, I mean, the one we know of in the film that died.
Yes.
But what happens in the book? Because I never read the book.
Well, the other children the other children survive. Actually, yes, they do. They do.
Did they stay with her, or did they go with their father?
Well, this is all rather. No, they don't go. The fathers are dead. The fathers are dead.
But that changes things if the 2 children are alive, because I mean part of the rift between Scarlett and Rhett is the fact that there's no child.
Well,
The emptiness of their life.
well, yes. I mean, I don't want to spoil it because, of course, people are going to see it. But the issue of children is complicated. I agree. Rather not say more than
Can I
that.
ask about something a bit different?
Yeah.
That's the reaction in America to the film in the North.
Mm.
Because
Yes.
It glorifies the South.
Yes.
And from my experience in America in the 60s when I lived there, the South was something that was regarded as, in the past, inferior, somewhat derided in the North. So I'm a little surprised that the film was so successful.
Well, it was, and I mean, it is a very good question, and I don't think that there was a huge difference between the northern and southern audiences. It was a huge hit. I mean, it was sometimes, I mean, you can see it as being about the Civil War, but actually the novel itself is very much more polemical than the film. And David Selznick was careful. He was very aware of the sensitivities of people in the late 30s about all kinds of things, about race, about fascism and so on. He was Jewish. He was, he was aware of what this film might be saying to people in the 30s about unfair kind of or unequal societies and divided societies and civil wars. And I think that what he tries to do is to fudge a lot of those things in the film so that it does become more of a kind of great epic drama. We can historicise it, we can kind of contextualise it now, and we can see that it does seem to defend the South. But it was much less attacked than Birth of a Nation, which had been which was a film that glorified the Ku Klux Klan that was made in 1915 and which David Selznick very much knew. And that was a film that said, that was about the glorious rise of the Ku Klux Klan. So Gone with the Wind seemed a much softer option. But you're right, it's a good question. One of the funny things about the choice of Vivien Leigh was that Southerners who wanted a Southern actress to play Scarlett O'Hara were delighted that at least Vivien Leigh was not a Northerner.
Sorry, that she was what?
That she was not a Northerner.
Ah, okay.
So she was British, which was awful, but it wasn't as awful as her being a Northerner.
Even worse, yes. That's interesting.
Are there any other questions?
If there are no more questions, can we just thank Helen again, and can I remind you that her books are available to buy and she will sign them for you, but only until about 6:10. So I thank you all very much indeed for coming, and thank Helen for such a very interesting and entertaining but also informative talk. I think it gave me a very different view of the film, so thank you very much, Helen.
Thank you very much. Thank you.